You want to talk about the OBBB we already did and what it's going to do, or do you want to talk about what was left out and what still needed to be done?
Well, I think I'd like to say we achieved historic economic and fiscal reforms along with the largest investment in border security and national defense. So I think making our country safer, stronger, more prosperous has been achieved in terms of policies and creating the conditions. And I think that will be realized in the months and quarters ahead. I'm very proud of that, much needed, long overdue. And then you mentioned future budget reconciliation opportunities. I think we stretched that rubber band between the moderates and fiscal hawks quite a bit to get that bill through and have record spending reductions at $1.5 trillion. That's twice as much as we've ever cut in spending. Yep. Is there more meat on the bone in terms of fiscal reforms? You bet. As budget chairman, I can tell you there's never enough for me, especially with $2 trillion annual deficits and a $36 trillion
would it be more
debt hole.
That's the thing. Would it be more spending cuts? More? Because you remember, I know you saw Senator Johnson just hammering the point that we're so far above what we were spending pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Even though there's no pandemic anymore. He wanted to go line by line.
Yes.
And Mike Johnson, the speaker, said, look, I'd like to do that too, but here's my card. Here's the hand that I have. Here's the hand that you have in the House. Here's the hand in the Senate. We're not going to do it. The hand isn't changing, so why be optimistic now? And then you got the parliamentarian, which said a lot of things, didn't pass the Byrd rule. Is there a way of structuring some of those things to get that done?
There is. I think we can spend a little more time on some of the conservative reforms that were kicked out by the parliament, like prohibitions against taxpayer dollars going to transgender procedures, which I think is totally inappropriate. Well, it was kicked out, but we didn't spend enough time to try to figure out how to write it so that it was more budget and impact than policy.
I don't know how you make that budget, though.
Well, we did it on a number of fronts that people didn't think, like defunding Planned Parenthood with respect to Medicaid funding, which is the largest source of funding for Planned Parenthood. So I think there's a way to do it. We just didn't spend enough time. Another thing that was kicked out is our ability to enforce the prohibition on states using fungible Medicaid dollars for people here illegally. Right. Those are two that I would put into the sort of conservative reforms. And then there are Medicaid and Medicare non-benefit efficiencies. Medicare, for example, we're paying hospitals more in reimbursement for the same procedures as physician groups on outpatient procedures, same outcomes, usually the same and often the same mid-levels in physicians. And we could save $150 billion by just equalizing payments. There's a number of those non-benefit efficiency reforms, I think, left for us to dig into. Did we maximize that sort of political fault lines within the conference? I think so. We had $1.7 trillion in cuts. The Senate had $1.5. We offset the tax cuts and had no deficit. They had about a $500 billion delta. I think we'll cover that, Joe, just by keeping discretionary spending flat. Trump put a 23% cut on discretionary spending. Right. That's 25% of the budget. In reconciliation, where we were focused on the 75%, the mandatory spending, health care and welfare. If we hold discretionary flat, we just constrain it for 1 year, that's $500 billion in savings over a year. And that's just 1 year of the 4 years of the president's tenure. So we're going to more than offset it. And with growth, we're going to see the debt and deficit to GDP come down, the fiscal health of our country restored, and an opportunity for greater prosperity in the future. So I'm bullish.
The CBO will have a heart attack if the deficit comes down.
Yeah, they won't know what to do.
But sometimes it's GIGO because they have to do it a certain way, and those are the numbers they come out with. They aren't allowed to assume anything positive from any of this stuff.
Well, they were off wildly with record revenue to the Treasury when we cut corporate rates from 36 to 21. Right. We've had record revenue ever since. They were off by $1 trillion in 2023 on predicting what the deficit would be under Joe Biden. So we will get to that 2.6 annual average growth rate that we assumed in our budget. I think we will exceed it. We were conservative. Biden and Trump both had higher than the 2.6 in their tenure.
But I think there's a fair question to be asked about whether the tax cuts unto themselves ultimately pay for themselves.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think we can go back in history, and it is very rare where tax cuts on their own pay for themselves. It really is only going to work if all of these other component parts, including some of the deregulation issues that we talked about, actually pan out.
Yes. Well, I think we took on Republican orthodoxy. When I say we, deficit hawks and my budget committee members, who for the first time said, we're going to tie spending cuts to tax cuts. And we're not going to suggest that all tax cuts are created equally, that all are pro-growth, and that all pay for themselves. So I would agree with you, which is exactly why we put that provision in the House budget to offset the tax cut cost. The Senate didn't comply, which is why they made theirs permanent and ran up about a $500 billion tab over the House budget. So I agree with you.
Right.
Even when the House does nothing for a new president, they get thrown out. You've done a lot. Is the House going to stay Republican in your view? I mean, it is. This was a big bill. This is monumental, and you know that it's if depending on what poll you look at, which mainstream media outlet is talking about it, it's supposedly really unpopular. Is it possible that you need to do everything within the first 2 years of the Trump presidency that you want to do?
I think in my mentality after 10 years of serving in Congress is you do everything you can. I think we struck a good balance in terms of the fiscal reforms and spending reduction measures. I think the proof's going to be in the pudding, right? We did this in a very aggressive timetable, right? Both the House on Memorial Day and Independence Day to complete the whole project. That gives enough time, Joe, for the reality of the policies to show up in the paychecks and the pocketbooks of our hardworking Americans who got enhanced tax breaks through increased standard deduction, through the no tax on tip breaks, overtime, seniors. The list is...
Might have been worth it just to get the 100% expensing for companies that are trying to grow.
The 100% expensing is the most pro-growth.
Well, can I ask a question about that, though?
Yeah.
And then I actually have a question about Texas and one of your residents. But you probably know who I'm going to ask about it. On the expensing question, my understanding is it goes back to 2022, so you can actually retroactively expense.
Yeah, you can.
And so the question is, the only thing I don't understand about that piece is that doesn't spur new spending, right? That's almost just a thank you present for past spending. And that was one I didn't really understand if I was trying to incentivize going forward, because that's effectively, as I said, sort of a very look-backing kind of thing to do.
I'm with you. I mean, this is negotiated not for my ideal policies, but for good policies. I agree it should be prospective because we're trying to incentivize the right behavior going forward, which we have done, both with tax relief for working families and those business provisions that we supercharge by making them permanent, especially the expensing, R&D, interest expensing, capital expensing. But no, I don't disagree with that.
And then on one of your probably most
Hit me
famous
with that Texas question.
most famous resident, at least at the moment in your state, beyond our former president, is a guy named Elon Musk who doesn't like
I've heard of that.
who doesn't like any of this and is all over Twitter or X, I should say. Very frustrated both with what it means to all the work he did on Doge. He's going after the president, constantly now raising the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. I don't know. I'm curious what you make just of all of that. And what do you tell him?
I think there's a lot of personal feelings wrapped up in his comments, obviously. I think that's obvious to people. But to give him credit, I think he's been concerned about the fiscal trajectory of our country, the national debt. I think he's right. There's tremendous waste. Joe mentioned the COVID bloat. That's hundreds of billions of dollars that we never right-sized after COVID. By the way, that's on the discretionary side mostly. So that's going to be harder because that's a bipartisan appropriations process as opposed to a unified Republican exercise in reconciliation. But nevertheless, I give him credit. I think since Ronald Reagan, no one has raised the awareness of our fiscal decline and the need to rein it in and restore discipline and responsibility in America's government's balance sheet than Elon Musk. So I think I take the good of what he's done, and I'll let these other personal issues settle in time, which I believe they will.